What happens when the hero wins? Most stories would have us believe that victory brings peace, that the chosen one's destiny is fulfilled, and that the world is better for their rule. But Frank Herbert's Dune Messiah doesn't follow that script. Instead, it asks a much darker and more difficult question. What if the hero's success is just the beginning of his downfall? What if power, no matter how well-intentioned, always comes at a terrible cost? Dune Messiah is one of the most surprising sequels in science fiction. While Dune was about revolution and destiny, Dune Messiah pulls the rug out from under its hero. It questions the nature of power, challenges the idea of a chosen one, and turns Paul Atreides' triumph into a tragedy. It takes everything that made Dune an epic story of war, prophecy, and ambition and flips it upside down, showing us the painful consequences of the choices made in the first book. 12 years after taking the throne, Paul Atreides rules the known universe as Emperor, but his rule comes at a huge cost. The religious war fought in his name has spread across the universe, killing billions. Though horrified by its scale, Paul knowingly set events in motion that led to the war, and now finds himself trapped in the path he foresaw. He sees the destruction his rule has caused, yet he fears that any attempt to stop it could lead to even worse outcomes. Meanwhile, his enemies are closing in. A secret alliance, including the Bene Gesserit, the Spacing Guild, and the Tleilaxu, is plotting to overthrow him. They manipulate those closest to him, including his wife, Princess Irulan, who is pressured by her family to produce an heir and preserve the Corrino bloodline. Paul's only true love, Chani, struggles under the pressure to give him children while knowing Irulan is working against her. Paul can see the future, but that doesn't mean he can change it. He knows every path ends in suffering, yet he is powerless to escape his fate. His downfall accelerates when a terrorist attack orchestrated by his enemies leaves him physically blind. However, due to his prescient abilities, he is still able to navigate the world through visions of the future. This eerie prophetic sight makes him even more detached from the present, further alienating him from those around him. But when Chani dies after giving birth to their children, Paul is pushed to his breaking point. As betrayals unfold and conspiracies tighten around him, Paul is forced to make an impossible choice, one that will determine his legacy. Choosing to embrace blindness, he walks into the desert in accordance with the Fremen tradition, sacrificing himself not only to escape his fate, but also to control how history remembers him. One of the most interesting things about Dune Messiah is how it challenges the idea of the hero's journey. At the end of Dune, Paul seems to have won. He's defeated his enemies, claimed his throne, and fulfilled the prophecy. But in Messiah, we see that his victory wasn't a happy ending at all. It was the start of something much darker. Paul is no longer the fearless young leader fighting for survival. Now he's trapped in a role he can't escape. The very thing that made him powerful, his ability to see the future, has now turned into a curse. He watches as his empire spirals into chaos, knowing there's no way to stop it. Instead of shaping history, he is being crushed by it. Paul isn't the only one struggling under the weight of his empire. His sister Alia faces her own existential crisis. Born with full consciousness due to Jessica's spice consumption during pregnancy, Alia was never given a normal childhood. Now, as Paul's closest confidant and powerful political figure, she wrestles with loneliness and the expectations placed upon her. Worshipped as a religious figure, feared for her unnatural abilities, and isolated from true companionship, Alia's journey mirrors Paul's in many ways. While Paul can see the path of his downfall, Alia is still trying to find her place in the world that views her as something other than human. Meanwhile, Jessica's absence looms over the story. Having once defied the Bene Gesserit to shape Paul's destiny, she ultimately rejects the empire he builds. By leaving Arrakis and distancing herself from Paul's rule, she becomes a reminder of the choices that led to this moment. Her absence is as much a statement as her presence would have been. She chooses not to fight for or against Paul, but instead steps away, letting him face the consequences of his own decisions. Alia's struggles and Jessica's absence both serve to highlight larger themes in Dune Messiah: the inescapable weight of power and the unintended consequences of shaping the future. While Paul tries to control his fate, those around him are just as much prisoners of destiny, caught in the web of prophecy and expectation. Aaliyah's story in particular will only grow darker, foreshadowing the tragedy that unfolds in Children of Dune. Herbert uses Paul's story to challenge the idea that one person can fix everything. He suggests the leader, no matter how powerful or well-intentioned, can be swept away by forces beyond their control. It's a stark contrast to the usual Chosen One narrative and makes Dune Messiah a much more complex and thought-provoking book than its predecessor. Another big theme in Dune Messiah is the danger of religious fanaticism. In Dune, Paul used the Fremen's beliefs to rise to power. Now those beliefs have grown into a religion that he can no longer control. People see him as a god, and wars are being fought in his name, whether he wants them or not. The book raises important questions about the relationship between power and faith. What happens when a leader becomes the centre of a religion? Can someone rule wisely when they're worshipped like a god? Paul's struggle shows how dangerous it can be when people blindly follow a leader, especially one who doesn't want the role in the first place. Dune Messiah forces us to think about how power and belief shape the world, and whether any leader can escape the weight of their own influence. While Dune was filled with battles and survival, Messiah shifts the focus to political strategy and betrayal. Paul's enemies don't try to defeat him on the battlefield, they use manipulation, lies, and subtle attacks to weaken his rule. The Bene Gesserit, the Spacing Guild, and the Tleilaxu all have their own reasons for wanting Paul gone, and they aren't afraid to use people closest to him to make it happen. One of the most unsettling parts of the book is the introduction of the Goller, Duncan Idaho, a resurrected version of Paul's old friend created by the Tleilaxu as part of their scheme. He looks like Duncan, but is he truly the same person? The Tleilaxu have implanted a hidden trigger within him, yet his eventual recovery of past memories makes him the first fully restored Goller, a breakthrough that will have profound implications for the future. Herbert uses this character to explore deep questions about identity, memory, and control. The book's tension comes from these quiet, deadly battles rather than physical fights. Paul is constantly watching for betrayal, never sure who he can trust. Herbert forces us to engage with the realities of political power, how even the strongest ruler can be undone, not by war, but by carefully laid traps and hidden enemies. For some readers, Dune Messiah is a tough book to get through. It doesn't have the grand heroics and epic battles of Dune. Instead, it's more about philosophy, politics, and the consequences of power, but that's exactly what makes it brilliant. Herbert wasn't interested in writing a simple adventure story. He wanted to explore how power works, how leaders rise and fall, and how myths can take on their life of their own. Messiah makes us question what it really means to be a hero and whether being a hero is even a good thing. By the end of the book, Paul is broken. He's physically blinded, emotionally shattered, and chooses to walk into the desert, leaving behind his empire and his children. His rule ends not with a grand victory, but with a sacrifice and loss. Yet his story does not truly end. His influence lingers, shaping the fate of the Imperium through his children, Leto II and Ganima, whose destinies unfold in Children of Dune. More than 50 years after its release, Dune Messiah remains one of the most thought-provoking sci-fi books ever written. It speaks to modern issues in ways that feel just as relevant as they did in 1969. The dangers of blind faith, the burden of leadership, and the corrupting nature of power. These are themes that still shape our world today. If Dune was about the rise of a legend, Dune Messiah is about the cost of that legend. It challenges us to think critically about leadership, power, and destiny, and that's what makes it such an essential part of the Dune series and of science fiction as a whole. Dune Messiah might not be the adventure you expect, but it will give you something even better. A deeper, more thought-provoking look at the cost of power and the limits of fate. Thanks so much for watching. If you're craving an extraordinary journey through realms unexplored, consider delving into universes directly out of my brain by checking out my sci-fi novels Black Milk and Delphine Descends. You can find more details in the description. Thanks for your support.